I'm a big action guy. I've done some of the biggest action films in the world. A lot of action guys, like Tom Cruise says, like, you know, they do all their own stunts. Did you ever, like, back in the day, did you do your own stunts?
Of course.
Really? Like,
have to.
barefoot across the glass and Die Hard and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Really? Why?
Still
Why
have
do you need to
discussed.
do that? What's the purpose of that? It sounds, no offense.
For the audience, for you know, for.
For years, people who had loved Bruce Willis found themselves asking a question they did not want to ask. The light that had once animated his face, the irreverence, the quick intelligence, the particular refusal to take even the most absurd situation too seriously, seemed to be going out. His roles grew shorter. His lines grew fewer. Nearly 24 people who worked alongside him in his final years reportedly voiced their concerns about what they were witnessing on set. Stories circulated that he could not remember his lines, that they were being spoken into his ear through a small device, and that he was simply repeating what he heard. There were accounts suggesting he sometimes did not know why he was standing where he was standing. Some people who had grown up watching him decided the explanation was simple. They concluded he had stopped caring, that the name was being rented out, that the man who had once run barefoot across broken glass in a Los Angeles high-rise had simply checked out. That suspicion felt reasonable. The evidence appeared to support it. But the evidence was pointing towards something far more devastating than anyone who loved that smirk, that particular combination of courage and humor that had belonged only to him, could have been prepared to understand. If this story speaks to something you have carried for a long time, stay with us. Walter Bruce Willis was born on March 19, 1955, in the town of Idar Oberstein, in what was then West Germany. His father, David Andrew Willis, was a United States Army soldier stationed there. His mother, Marlene Castle, was German, from the city of Kassel. When his father was discharged from the military in 1957, the family moved to his father's hometown, Carneys Point Township, New Jersey, a small community in Salem County along the Delaware River. That is where young Bruce Willis grew up. That is where he became who he eventually was. Carneys Point was not a town that offered easy paths. It was working class down to its foundations. The DuPont chemical plant in the neighboring township of Deepwater set the rhythm of the working week for many of the families who lived there. Men came home from shifts and did not talk about destiny. They talked about what had to get done. Willis described himself throughout his life as coming from a long line of blue-collar people. The phrase was not self-deprecation, it was simply accurate. His father worked as a welder, a mechanic, and a factory worker after leaving the army. A man who showed up because showing up was what was required, and he did not question the requirement. His mother worked at a bank, practical, organized, steady in the way that people who need to make a household work learn to be steady. Willis was the eldest of 4 children. He had a younger sister, Florence, and 2 younger brothers, Robert and David. Robert would die of pancreatic cancer in 2001, at 42 years old. The Willis family understood early that life grants no exemptions. There was a stutter. It came during childhood and it stayed. His schoolmates at Pennsgrove High School nicknamed him Buck Buck, the kind of nickname that tells you something about how a boy is perceived before he has found the thing that reveals him completely. In a town that valued directness, a boy who could not finish his own sentence without his voice betraying him learned early and at close range what it felt like to be misunderstood before he was heard. The discovery came on a stage, when Willis joined the drama club and stepped into a character, someone else's words, someone else's life. The stutter released its hold. Not metaphorically, literally. On that stage, the thing that had followed him everywhere could not follow him there. He was eventually elected student council president. The boy who had trouble finishing sentences was now standing in front of a crowd, and the crowd was listening. Something had been found. The question was only what to do with it. After graduating from high school in 1973, Willis worked as a security guard at the Salem nuclear power plant and transported work crews at the DuPont Chambers Works factory in Deepwater. These were not detours. They were the life that was available to him, and he lived it without complaint. He later enrolled in the drama program at Montclair State University in New Jersey, where he was cast in a production of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. He left in his junior year in 1977 and moved to New York City, and the decade of genuine difficulty began. He lived in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of Manhattan. He supported himself tending bar at an art bar called Kamikaze and later at Chelsea Central on the Upper West Side. He auditioned. He waited. He did small things and kept arriving. He appeared in an off-Broadway production called Heaven and Earth in 1977. He had a bit part in the Frank Sinatra film The First Deadly Sin in 1980. He appeared as an extra in the courtroom drama The Verdict in 1982, a Paul Newman film in which Willis appeared briefly in the background, present in the scene, not yet visible to the world. He appeared in an episode of Miami Vice in 1984. John Goodman, who knew Willis during those New York years and would go on to his own substantial career, remembered him later and said, "Bruce was the best bartender in New York. He kept an entire joint entertained all night. He just kept the show going. He was amazing." Quote, "The observation is easy to read as a compliment about charm. It is something more than that. It describes a person who had found, even in a role that was not the one he wanted, a way to be fully present. That was the thing that could not be taught. The screen had simply not found him yet." In 1986, Willis released a cover of Respect Yourself, the Staple Singers song, as part of his debut album The Return of Bruno, under the alter ego Bruno Radolini. The single reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Subsequent releases failed to match it in the United States. The music was a genuine passion that came up short, and he moved on the way. A man who has been moving on since Carney's Point knows how to move on. What the decade built was invisible at the time and permanent in its effect. A man who had learned, through 10 years of doors not opening, that the work itself was the answer, and that nothing about this was going to be given to him. In 1985, Willis auditioned for a lead role on a new ABC television series. He beat out more than 3,000 other candidates. The show was called Moonlighting, and it ran until 1989. Willis played David Addison Jr., a wisecracking, irreverent private detective forced into professional partnership with Maddie Hayes, a former model played by Sybil Shepherd. The two of them bickered and bantered and circled the attraction between them, and audiences responded with genuine enthusiasm. What Moonlighting revealed was something no audition room had quite captured before. When Willis was in a scene with something to play against, a line of dialogue, a situation he could treat as serious or absurd, or both at once, he produced something that felt effortless and was, in fact, the product of 10 years of total commitment. Sybil Shepherd would later say, "No one else was ever considered for the part when he walked in the room." Willis won an Emmy for his performance in 1987. He won a People's Choice Award. The show found its audience, and the audience found him. What the show could not do was tell Willis, or the industry, what kind of actor he was actually capable of being. Television fame is specific fame. It makes a face familiar. It attaches a type to a person. The type it attached to Bruce Willis was charming, quick, funny. That was not wrong, but it was incomplete. The question Moonlighting raised was the question that a film set in a Los Angeles high-rise would have to answer. Die Hard opened on July 15, 1988. John McTiernan directed it. Willis played John McClane, a New York City police officer who flies to Los Angeles on Christmas Eve to try to reconcile with his estranged wife, Holly. Holly, played by Bonnie Bedelia, had built her own career in Los Angeles and had moved on with her life because he had refused to follow her, had refused to support her path, had chosen his own sense of place over their marriage. That wound is real before Hans Gruber ever sets foot in the building. Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman in his feature film debut, was the kind of villain who made the hero more interesting by having real intelligence of his own. Their collision produced something the action genre had not quite seen before. McClane was not invulnerable. He bled. He complained. He spoke to himself in the dark of an air duct like a man genuinely calculating whether he was going to survive the next 10 minutes. Willis admitted he was afraid of the stunts. He said he probably would not have agreed to several of them had he seen the full picture beforehand. The fear was real. It shows, not as weakness, but as something far more useful to a performance. Truth. The film grossed more than $140 million worldwide against a production budget of roughly $28 million. That number meant a career and a franchise. But what Die Hard actually gave American cinema was a different argument about what a screen hero was supposed to be. The genre before 1988 had largely operated on the logic of fantasy. Men of impossible capability performing impossible deeds. Willis arrived with a receding hairline, a cotton undershirt, and no backup plan. He changed what audiences believed they were allowed to want. He said, "John McClane is really an ordinary man in extraordinary circumstances." He was describing not just the character but the principle that made the performance matter. Around the same period, Willis and Demi Moore welcomed their first daughter, Rumor, in 1988. He spoke about early fatherhood with the honesty of someone who had not fully prepared to be as moved as he was. He said, "I think I'm much more afraid of making a mistake in raising my daughters than I would be with any work that I do as an actor. It's a much higher scale of fear, raising kids." The action hero was also a new father who did not yet know how to be one, and that too was a kind of truth. Die Hard 2 came in 1990 and made even more money than the first film, and Willis almost immediately began looking sideways from the franchise. In Country was released in 1989, a quiet, serious film about a young woman trying to understand her uncle's Vietnam experience. Willis played the uncle. It was a different register entirely. Grief, distance, the weight of things that cannot be spoken. Look Who's Talking, also 1989, gave him the voice of a baby named Mikey, a piece of casting that revealed his willingness to be genuinely ridiculous in service of a joke. The Bonfire of the Vanities in 1990 cast him as journalist Peter Fallow in an ambitious adaptation of Tom Wolfe's novel. None of these were Die Hard. Willis had said plainly that doing only action films would bore him. He said he was still learning how to act. He said he liked creative risk. The public image he carried during these years was one of the more genuinely appealing things in American celebrity. Not fake Hollywood, but a solid New Jersey guy. The humor was self-aware rather than self-congratulatory. The humility was consistent rather than performed. He warned his daughters about the negative side of fame. He said he would support them if they wanted to act, but they would go in with clear eyes. He said, "My favorite job is being a father." He said it in an interview in 2013, and there is no reason to think he had not been saying some version of it since 1988. The smirk. It was the thing people recognized before they recognized him. The slight uplift at one corner of the mouth, the expression of a man who has just registered something, the absurdity, the danger, the sheer impossibility of the situation, and decided to proceed anyway. It was not arrogance. It is worth being precise about that, because the misreading of it as arrogance cost Willis something over the course of his career. It was not the expression of a man who believed nothing could touch him. It was the expression of a man who knew exactly how badly things could go and had chosen forward motion over paralysis anyway. When you watch it carefully, in an air duct, at the barrel of a gun, at the end of a long day of bleeding, it is courage dressed as humor. The audience believed John McClane not because he looked invincible, but because he looked like a person deciding, one moment at a time, not to stop. What it traced back to was the high school stage in Carneys Point, New Jersey. A boy with a stutter who discovered that when he stepped into a character, the thing that had followed him everywhere could not follow him there. Presence. Forward motion. Not stopping. He had simply found larger rooms for it. What the smirk cost him was a full accounting of his range. Directors cast him for it. Studios marketed him as it. The restraint and grief of The Sixth Sense. The physical and moral exhaustion of 12 Monkeys. The stillness of Pulp Fiction. All of it existed beneath the surface, consistently underestimated by an industry that had decided what he was for. He said, "I'm always astounded by people who think I'm just a muscle man. I've never thought of myself that way." He was right. The people who looked more carefully agreed with him. Pulp Fiction, 1994. Quentin Tarantino directing. Willis as Butch Coolidge, a boxer with a moral choice at the center of the story, a man who does not do the easy thing. The film won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. It remains one of the most significant American films of its decade, and his performance, quieter, more internal, more grounded than almost anything he had done in the action genre, demonstrated something the industry had not fully acknowledged. He could act with real depth and real restraint. Die Hard with a Vengeance came in 1995. 12 Monkeys, also 1995. Terry Gilliam directing, Willis as a man fragmented across time, the role earning him a Golden Globe nomination. The Fifth Element in 1997. Armageddon in 1998, one of the highest-grossing films of the year. Then, The Sixth Sense in 1999, M. Night Shyamalan directing. Willis as Dr. Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist who does not yet understand the full truth of what is happening around him. The film grossed $672 million worldwide. His performance was built almost entirely on restraint, what he chose not to do, not to say, not to show. It was the opposite of the smirk. It was stillness in the service of a secret the audience had not yet discovered. In October 2000, he and Demi Moore announced their separation. They had been together for 13 years. The split was described by both parties and consistently over the years that followed as amicable, focused on the 3 daughters they had built a family around. Willis later attended Demi Moore's wedding to Ashton Kutcher in 2005. That fact belongs here not as celebrity detail, but as evidence of the private architecture he had committed to. Whatever the marriage had become, the family had not ended, and the children would not be asked to feel it end. He turned down a chance to appear in Ocean's 11. He was in talks for a role, scheduling conflicts prevented it, and appeared instead as himself in a cameo in the sequel Ocean's 12 in 2004, Unbreakable in 2000, Sin City in 2005, Over the Hedge in 2006. He returned to John McClane in Live Free or Die Hard in 2007, the franchise still alive and still drawing audiences. He was approaching 50 and making deliberate choices about where his time went. More and more of it was going home. He married Emma Hemming on March 21, 2009. They had 2 daughters together, Mabel Ray, born 2012, and Evelyn Penn, born 2014. Between them and his 3 daughters with Demi Moore, Rumor, Scout LaRue, and Tallulah Bell, Bruce Willis was the father of 5 girls. He said he would step in front of a car for his children. He said he was more afraid of making mistakes raising them than of anything he faced as an actor. He was present at the births of his children. He said, "My favorite job is being a father." He was not performing those statements. The choices that followed them were consistent with what he said. He warned his daughters about Hollywood, said they had seen enough of the negative side of fame to understand what it was. He said he would encourage them if they wanted to act, but they would go in with clear eyes. He wanted them to have what he had not had: information, preparation, an honest picture of the thing before they chose it. The private arrangement between Willis and Demi Moore after their separation was, by every public account, one of the more quietly dignified co-parenting relationships in a world that tends to make those arrangements ugly and visible. They showed up together for their daughters. They did not ask the children to carry the weight of a broken marriage. Emma Hemming Willis arrived into a blended family of considerable complexity and visibility, and she stayed. 5 daughters, 2 families, 1 man who said his children were the real core of his life, and whose family, when the diagnosis came, behaved as though they had always believed him. In 2012, Willis appeared in Moonrise Kingdom, directed by Wes Anderson, as Captain Sharp, a gentle, worried authority figure in one of Anderson's most warmly realized films. That same year, he appeared in Looper, directed by Rian Johnson, as the older version of a character played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. The range was still there, the seasoned actor was visible, but across the years that followed, something was becoming observable to people who had not been told what they were seeing. Roles grew shorter, lines grew fewer. A body double stood in for him during most action sequences, particularly those involving gunfire. An actor named Hugh L. Potter was reportedly present on set to feed lines into an earpiece, which Willis would repeat. A longtime associate named Stephen J. Eads guided him physically on set, kept him oriented, managed the practical reality of getting him where he needed to be. The direct-to-video era produced its own layer of public scrutiny. A producer named Randall Emmett was connected to a business model that used a recognizable star's name and face to pre-sell films to distributors before production was complete. Willis appeared in productions where his total screen time was measured in minutes. Fans and critics drew the obvious conclusion: he had stopped caring. He was collecting a check. The brand was being exploited and he was permitting it. That conclusion felt reasonable. The evidence appeared to support it. Nearly 24 people who worked with Willis in his final years reportedly voiced serious concerns. On the set of Hard Kill in 2020, 2 people reported that Willis fired a prop gun loaded with a blank on the wrong cue. More than once, actress Lala Kent, who played his daughter in the film, went on record. Director Mike Burns, who worked with Willis on 2 separate productions, said that after just 1 day of working with him, the decline was unmistakably clear. He said, "After we finished, I said, I'm done. I'm not going to do any other Bruce Willis movies." Director Jesse V. Johnson, who had worked alongside Willis decades earlier as a stuntman and knew him from a different era entirely, said that when he directed him on White Elephant in 2021, he was not the Bruce I remembered. On that set, Willis reportedly said, looking around at the crew assembled around him, "I know why you're here, and I know why you're here, but why am I here?" 2 crew members were present when he said it. Neither of them understood, at the time, what they were actually hearing. A 2019 interview had shown a man who seemed low energy, who repeated himself, who spoke vaguely and without the sharpness people remembered. It was noted and then set aside, filed as preference, or age, or disengagement, because the true explanation had not yet been given a name that anyone in that room was prepared to say aloud. On March 30th, 2022, a joint family statement was released. It was signed by Demi Moore, Emma Hemming Willis, and their daughters. The statement announced that Bruce Willis had been diagnosed with aphasia and that he was stepping away from his acting career. Aphasia is a communication disorder. It affects the ability to speak, to understand language, to read, to write, and to process numbers. In Willis's case, it was not caused by a stroke or a sudden injury. It had developed slowly, over time, as the symptom of something progressing underneath. The moment the announcement was made, the behavior that people had witnessed for years on film sets and in interviews became legible in a different way entirely. The earpiece was not indifference. The empty look in his eyes was not contempt. The shortened roles were not professional laziness. He was losing the ability to do what he had spent a decade on the streets of New York working to build. The language that the stage in Carney's Point had set free was going away, not by choice, by disease. Less than a year later, on February 16, 2023, the family released a further statement confirming that the underlying cause of Willis's aphasia had been identified. The diagnosis was frontotemporal dementia, known as FTD. Frontotemporal dementia is not Alzheimer's disease. They are distinct conditions, and the distinction matters. FTD is a progressive neurological disease affecting the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, the regions that govern personality, behavior, language, and decision-making. It is the most common form of dementia in people under 60. Its onset is typically earlier than other neurodegenerative diseases. It can cause profound personality changes. It can cause the gradual, devastating erosion of a person's ability to communicate. There are no current treatments. The disease progresses. Emma Hemming Willis later described the first signs she had noticed in her husband. They were not in his memory, they were in his personality. A withdrawal, a removal, a coldness that was the opposite of everything she knew about him. She told Diane Sawyer, "For someone who is very talkative and very engaged, he was just a little more quiet. When the family would get together, he would kind of just melt a little bit." She said, "It felt a little removed, very cold, not like Bruce, who was very warm and affectionate. To go the complete opposite of that was alarming and scary." When the diagnosis finally arrived, she described leaving the doctor's office with a pamphlet and what she called a hollow goodbye. She said it felt like free-falling. Emma Hemming Willis made difficult decisions about care. Willis now lives in a second home, a single-story house nearby, staffed around the clock with professional care, while she and their younger daughters, Mabel and Evelyn, remain in the family's primary residence. The decision attracted public criticism. She responded to that criticism with the directness of someone who has already done the harder work of making the decision itself. She said, "I know that Bruce wouldn't want our children's lives to be clouded by his diagnosis, and we are privileged that this was something we could do, and it has turned out to be the hardest, yet the best, for everyone." A neurologist told her directly, "You're burning your candle at both ends, and you need to understand that sometimes, due to the stress of caregiving, the caregiver dies before the person that they are caring for." She received that statement as the medical warning it was. She said, "We have young kids, and I didn't want them to lose 2 parents." She began to understand that caring for herself was not selfishness. It was the only sustainable path toward continuing to be present for him, for Mabel and Evelyn, for all of it. She said, "If we don't care for ourselves, then how can we properly tend to the person that we're caring for? The photographs and videos the public has seen, Willis with his daughter Mabel, Willis surrounded by the women who love him, show a man who is still physically present, still recognizable, still there. He is not fully aware of what has happened to him. His care is supported by the resources that 40 years of work built, resources that most families navigating this disease cannot access. That disparity is worth naming honestly. Frontotemporal dementia does not calibrate its cruelty to a person's financial situation. What changes based on resources is the access to help. Many families face exactly what Emma Hemming Willis faces, and face it without the help that makes the carrying of it possible. She has written a book, The Unexpected Journey, to be the roadmap she was never handed when she needed one. The label that attached itself to Bruce Willis in his final working years was specific and it was unkind. A man who had stopped caring, who was cashing a paycheck, who was allowing his name and face to be rented out while giving nothing in return. It felt earned. The evidence appeared to support it. What the label missed was documented in two family statements in 2022 and 2023. The decline that people read as disengagement was not disengagement. It was frontotemporal dementia progressing silently through the frontal and temporal lobes of a brain that had spent 4 decades learning how to hold a scene, how to find the moment, how to be fully present. Willis did not choose the earpiece. He did not choose the shortened lines. He did not choose the confused silences on sets where people were quietly trying to help him without saying aloud what they were helping him with. He was losing the capacity to do what he had spent his entire adult life learning to do. He said, "I really do believe that you can't be a good actor unless you're a good human being." The man who held that belief, who carried it as a principle about both his craft and his life, was the same man who in his final working years was being quietly observed losing the capacity to remember why he was in the room. Those are not two different men. They are the same man at two different points in the same story. The industry that used his face for poster real estate and pre-sales, while he was visibly struggling, does not emerge clean from this accounting. That is not an invented charge. It is the documented record, what was known and when, and what obligations exist when a person's capacity to protect himself may be compromised. Those questions belong to the record and to the people who will eventually have to answer for what they did and did not do. What the audience owed him, in retrospect, was the same generosity he had given them for 4 decades, the willingness to look more carefully, to ask why before concluding. He built 40 years playing men who refused to be stopped, men who bled and complained and were afraid and kept going anyway. Men for whom stopping was simply not the option that got chosen, not because they were invulnerable, but because the alternative was unacceptable. That was always the argument underneath the smirk. The thing that ended his career is something no screenplay can write its way out of. That is not tragedy in the Hollywood sense. That is life, arriving honestly at the end of a long and driven story. Die Hard transformed American cinema's understanding of what a screen hero was supposed to look like. Moonlighting gave television a different idea of what charm could accomplish when real intelligence was underneath it. Pulp Fiction demonstrated to an industry that had categorized him too quickly that they had not looked carefully enough. The Sixth Sense asked him to work almost entirely through stillness and concealment, and he answered the ask. Over 100 films across 4 decades, one of the most recognizable faces in the history of American movies. None of that is the thing the achievement list cannot capture. The thing the list cannot capture is 5 daughters who know their father, 2 women, one his first family, one his second, who chose to stand beside him when the cameras were gone and the diagnosis had arrived, and there was nothing left to promote. No trophy measures that, no record holds it. Carneys Point, New Jersey, a boy with a stutter who found that when he stepped onto a stage, the thing that had followed him everywhere could not follow him there. Presence. The ability to walk into a room with everything he had and have it received. That discovery carried him from a bar in Manhattan to a high-rise in Los Angeles, to Cannes, to a quiet house in his final years, where the people who love him keep arriving. Not because of the films, because of the man. He once said, "I wake up laughing. Yes, I wake up in a good mood." The man who said that, who believed it, was the same man the world is still learning how to understand properly. Bruce Willis did not lose his story. He completed it. In Carneys Point, in New York, on a high school stage where a boy with a stutter discovered that presence was the one thing no impediment could stop. And in the quiet of a house where 5 daughters and the people who love their father are still with him. Not because of the films, but because of the man who always said that family was the real core. If you ever watched Bruce Willis and felt something you could not quite name, that smirk, that refusal, that ordinary man who kept going, leave a tribute below. Not only for the films, for what we now know was behind them, for the boy in New Jersey who found his voice on a stage and gave it to all of us for 40 years. Honor that with a like and subscribe for more stories of American lives that meant more than the world understood while they were living them.